This is a blush tomato. It's like aroma. It's good for paste, fresh eating, and it's good for cooking if you're making sauce. I really enjoy these. They're more vigorous and they produce more than your common determinants. Roma tomatoes, and they're an indeterminate. But what we're doing today is we're going to add some Bigfoot mycorrhizae, and what this has in it is it's got biochar, kelp, worm casting, and other things to stimulate root growth. And through the fungus, it causes a symbiotic relationship with the plants in the soil and the different microorganisms in the soil to create a stronger, more disease-resistant, drought-tolerant plant that will be more vigorous and produce more fruit for you and your family. We're also going to add in some azomite. Now, this is trace minerals. I use this for all of our plants and vegetables. And what this is this is 68 different trace minerals that the soil over the last 150 years has really been leached out through commercial gardenings and runoff from building. And this is especially in urban areas with building stores and houses and subdivisions. A lot of the soil has been depleted, and also through agriculture where many years of planting, they're just adding in NPK, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium back to the soil. But they're forgetting, and the soil is lacking over 50 minerals and trace elements that we need and the soil needs to be fertile and healthy. So what we're doing here is we just have a hole dug, and in this hole we're just digging down here and clearing it out, and you can see this soil is super healthy. It's got a worm right there, and it's got all kinds of organic matter. And this Bigfoot needs to be made root contact. So you need to sprinkle it around and underneath the roots. I like using about a tablespoon to a teaspoon per plant, depending on what species of plant it is, what variety of fruit, and how big it's going to be and how long their growth season is. So we're just going to take about a teaspoon and sprinkle it, and that's going to be all around the bottom, and it has to make root contact. I'm going to put a little bit more. Okay, and then we're adding in our azomite. And again, this has 68 different trace minerals, and what this does is it adds everything that the plants need to be healthy, and also us humans need to be vigorous and strong, because what happens is when we start lacking in nutrition, the chemical elements, we begin to get sick and weak, and disease sets in, not only for the plants but also for us. So I'm just going to pinch off these bottom couple of stems here just like that. I'm going to put those to the side, turn that upside down, and you can see the root growth on this. It's not root bound, it's perfect, and I just put my fingers around that when I do that. And when you're transplanting, this Bigfoot is made for transplanting. It's going to stimulate these growths, these roots, and they are just going to explode throughout the soil, and it's going to make a very vigorous tomato plant. And what we like to do is when we transplant, you don't want the plant to be really moist. So give it a day or two without water. Now, we had some rain, so it was sitting outside and we got some rain on it, but it's pretty dry. And what that's going to do is once we water the plant in, the roots are going to spread out and take out and really adapt and become very vigorous. So just going to set that up in there, and I'm not going to, some people like burying it up, but I'm going to round it with this mulch. And you can see this soil is mostly clay, but it's good. It does have some organic material in there. And one thing that you want to note You always want ground cover over your plant. We have this mulch, and this has, if you look in this, it's already starting to break down. There's bark, there's leaves, there's twigs, there's all different kinds of things that are breaking down at different times. What you do not want to do is get your wood chips down in your soil like that. This is a big no-no. Keep your wood chips out of your soil. You want them on top and you want them to break down. But if they're in your soil, it will leach nitrogen out of your soil, and then your plants will look yellow, and they will come back. The nitrogen will come back, but the nitrogen is needed to break down the wood chips, and it uses the nitrogen in the soil, and then over time the nitrogen will come back to the soil. But during the grow period, the plant will be lacking in nitrogen. So we want to cover this up with soil, and we'll water that in. And you always want to water in when you transplant. And we got the Bigfoot. We got the Bigfoot in there with worm castings, kelp, and biochar. And the biochar holds carbon in the soil. Now what we're going to do here is you can actually plant this up about halfway, 3/4 of the way. For these right here, they've been growing. We transplanted these 3 times into bigger pots. So we had them in a 72 cell, and then we put them in a bigger cell, which was a 3-inch cell, and then we put them into the quart. And now they're ready to go. Okay, and what we're going to do is really put this, see, we're going to cover this up about 3 to 5 inches, and we're going to kind of tilt it on the, and this will protect it from the wind beating it up also, and it's going to grow across this trellis here. Okay, and again, you don't want your wood chips into your soil. You want them off top. Now what this is going to do is break down and add nutrients, but all the microorganisms, the worms, and the different things that the plant needs are now going to be able to come up to the soil and work the soil, and they're going to break this down much faster. And you can see right here where I just poured away some soil, it's damp under there. And this mimics, if we went out into nature, it could go weeks without raining, but we could go out into the forest or the woods and just move around in the forest. At the bottom of the forest, we could move around and we could find moist soil, and moist because it has ground cover all the time. And our agriculture commercially has taken the ground cover away from the soil, and we have gone to unnatural methods of growing commercially, and that is what's not only losing water conservation, but also it's losing a lot of the minerals because they're running off, or the wind's blowing off the topsoil, and we're losing that diversity that we need in the soil. But if you go anywhere where there's no ground cover, you will not find worms and other beneficial organisms at the top of the soil because it's dry and they just don't want it. But if we go down here, I'm just going to move down here. Now this is prime conditions for microorganisms to live. And look right there. And that's a perfect example. If we go out into the woods or the forest, we will find the worms. And look, here's a little baby. Okay, so the soil's fertile, and we've got to keep our ground. We have to keep our ground covered. That is a big thing that in the future and in home gardening or large scale gardening is you want ground cover, and the best ground cover is natural. You can use wood chips, you can use straw, you can use cut grass. Hopefully it doesn't have a lot of weed seeds in it, but anything to keep the ground covered, and then underneath it will be moist. And look here, right there, another. The relationships that worms have with the soil is a relationship where as the worm moves through the soil, it inhales soil through its body to propel it through the soil. And then at the end of it, it casts out the soil. And when the worm casts out the soil to propel itself through the soil, that soil has been conditioned. And what I mean by conditioned is this soil here that the worm, this soil, before the worm moves through it, may be lacking in calcium, nitrogen, and other things, other nutrients, chemical elements that we need. As the worm moves through it and casts the worm castings out, the soil will be conditioned, and those chemical elements, as they go through the worm multiplies those chemical elements. For example, calcium can be multiplied as it comes out. As you see right here, the worm just casted out a little bit of worm castings, and that right there will have more chemical elements, calcium, magnesium, nitrogen, that we need to be healthy and the soil to be healthy. And a lot of people don't understand that relationship and how important worms are and other microorganisms and organisms, beneficial organisms that we need for our soil and our plants to be healthy, that make us healthy. It's a very simple thing that goes on in the soil. A lot of people don't understand it, but you want worms. They condition the soil. They make the soil have more nutrients in it through the worm castings. This is Michael Silvera in Challengers Farm. Subscribe, like, and follow.